Hello, and thank you for coming along. Today we're going to be discussing spanning oceans and bridging traditions, libraries, the global humanities, and the overview effect in a digitized world. The libraries we're going to be looking at are small and big, sometimes just collections within libraries, like the Balliol Historic Collection. But we're going to be looking at the implications of these kinds of libraries for global understanding in the humanities. Basically, libraries all over the world are emerging with new kinds of techniques and technologies that allow people access from all over the world, whether they're university libraries in England or in America or in Europe, South America, or Africa and Asia. These libraries are developing common technologies that will allow communications to take place. Communications in things as simple as QR codes. QR codes are now emerging in such a way that people can use them around the world to communicate instantly. So this is the bundle of things we're going to be looking at for a few moments. The humanities have always been a central part of the tradition of higher education. In fact, the commitment to the humanities has been built in to that tradition so much that it's often written in stone, as it were. A building like this at Yale actually carves it into the stone. If you look at it carefully, you can see that the humanities, represented here by the ancient scripts of Phoenician, Assyrian, Greek, and Roman traditions, are actually carved into the portal above the door to the library, reminding us that the humanities are central to higher education. But recently, this has changed. In fact, things have changed everywhere in education. And we're beginning to see people who basically don't know much about the humanities and don't see how they're connected to them, largely because they're communicating in science and technology fields in some cases, but also because their main form of communication is through the cell phone or the iPad or even the computer screen. If you look at most activity among most college students these days, it's mediated through electronic media. What hope is there for the humanities in higher education? In fact, what hope is there for higher education in a digital world? Will these students ever experience the kinds of education in the humanities that have characterized previous generations? Forget the library if they get access to things through the cell phone. And forget even the more distant Hall of Graduate Studies altogether in the background. Inside higher education, a publication for people working in the university, in colleges, has even put out articles like this, a 4-step program, they call it, for cell phone dependent students. They ask, how can you get students to put down their cell phones and engage in class? This becomes the big challenge. In secondary school, a teacher might say, well, boys and girls, I want you now to put away your cell phones. We're going to discuss something important. In the college context, it's no longer boys and girls, but gentlemen and women, I'd like you to pay attention here and pay attention to each other. In fact, try to converse. Well, in many colleges and universities, this has become the case. And it raises the question, is it time to abandon all hope for seeing students embrace the humanities? If they embrace the humanities, is it time to ban student cell phones in classrooms? That's the open question. There seems to be a tension between the two. But in asking the question, is it time to abandon the humanities or cell phones? The answer is no, at least not yet, because in many respects, the humanities have just begun to emerge in a way that we've never been able to imagine before. Why? Well, basically because of what libraries have become in the digital age. Instruction used to take place within university lecture halls, and in some cases within seminar rooms. But libraries have largely displaced the lecture hall and the seminar room for several reasons. One of them was immediately because of the COVID crisis, the lockdown and the closing of many universities, and for that reason, their thrust onto an internet connection. Well, you could say that's going to dissolve once the COVID crisis is over, but perhaps not, because online instruction has become built in now to the expectations both of students, of teachers, and their parents. In the process, several new things have been developed, including ways of communicating about rather rare and scarce documents that have always been the purview of libraries, even small libraries. Consider this one, for example, at Balliol College in Oxford, England. This particular one is, in fact, a collection within the Balliol Library, so it's even smaller than a library itself. As it turns out, on the 19th of September, there's going to be an important event at this library. For the first time, the Balliol collections are going to be sharing their documents relating to slavery in the Age of Revolution. Well, like most colleges around the world, Balliol developed communications technologies to keep in touch with its various members of its community, both the students during COVID lockdown, the fellows themselves, certainly the staff, and the alumni. The alumni, of course, are in touch with the colleges that they may have graduated from because colleges like to keep track of them and approach them for donations, contributions, and insight every once in a while. This is the kind of gathering that takes place on an annual basis before COVID at Balliol, and they call it, in fact, the Balliol Society Weekend. In America, they call these things alumni reunions, but in Britain, they're called Society Weekends. Balliol Society's weekend is aimed for this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, the 18th and 19th of September. Again, not like American universities where alumni gatherings are usually at the end of the school year. At a place like Balliol, they're at the beginning of the school year. And the programs are pretty clear. Several years ago, Rhodes Scholars traveled back to Oxford to celebrate their 50th reunion of the up and coming reunion, which they called the coming up. That is, it's not the year they graduate, but the year they came up to Oxford that's celebrated. So this was the 50th reunion of their coming up to Balliol. And they were among the group of students and scholars from all the different years who were there to welcome Dame Helen Gosh as the new master of Balliol back in September 2018, before COVID. The program was pretty clear for this one this year, even though many will not be able to make the COVID moment. They can't travel, and accommodations are quite restricted during the COVID moment. But among other things, there's going to be a lecture given by Professor Seamus Perry, Professor of English Literature. It's the featured lecture at 5 p.m. on Saturday the 18th, before dinner and all. But it's going to be followed the next day by a library exhibit at St. Cross. Now, it turns out that Professor Seamus Perry is the fellow of the college who's the librarian. And he'll be introducing perhaps that exhibit the following day. The exhibit itself is very interesting. It's on slavery in the age of revolution. Because of its long and distinguished history, Balliol College is uniquely well placed to undertake this kind of long-term, large-scale reassessment of African history and perhaps of European history as well. Balliol College was founded in 1263. It's an impressive structure and has an even more impressive history. In effect, it was founded long before the rise of European Atlantic empires. In fact, well before the quote-unquote discovery in 1492 by Columbus of the New World, as it's sometimes called. In any case, Balliol's document collections contain rich materials illustrating the fully global aspects of European empire from 1263 to the present. In this Balliol exhibit alone, for example, the ships pictured in this video clip were from 1826 in a sketch of the New York harbor. And other original documents in the exhibit relate to Africa, Barbados, and Haiti, as well as the New York harbor itself, and their role in the Atlantic slavery system. slave revolts, the history of slavery and its many chapters on the island of Barbados in the West Indies, as it's indicated, and Haiti itself, borrowing some documents from those contributed by others to the Balliol collection. Now, the history of Balliol is also tied intimately to the rise of European overseas empires because it was the college in Oxford of the distinguished Scottish economist Adam Smith. And it's the writings of Adam Smith, especially his Wealth of Nations, that inspired, in fact, many would say, became the blueprint of British overseas empire. Over the years, Balliol College has had many economists studying the rise and impending demise of neoliberal market fundamentalism, including Gus Speth, former dean of the Yale School of Forestry, and Kate Raworth, one of the most distinguished young economists now critiquing neoliberal market fundamentalism. Master of the college prior to the current one, Dr. Sir Drummond Bone, fostered this kind of exchange in the college, and it was a lively place for the discussion of economics, the birthplace of PP&E, Politics, Philosophy, and Economics degree at Oxford. Balliol is fortunately under the leadership of Master Dame Helen Gosch. She's an accomplished and decorated former civil servant in Britain and someone with a long career of commitment to the importance of preserving the historical record. She worked in the National Trust for years and years, decades actually, before coming to Balliol. And that is dedicated to the preservation and restoration of historical materials. In other initiatives, Oxford and Empire has been a frequent theme of global webcasts that they've held ever since the COVID moment has descended upon us all. These are webcasts made available from other Oxford programs, but they're readily available on YouTube for viewing by everyone in the world, including Oxford and Oriental Studies, Oxford and Empire Translating Empire. These are very rich discussions that it took place as part of the Oxford Research Center in the Humanities, or TORCH as it's known for short. Moreover, Balliol is not the only college in Oxford, obviously, with a library and rich archival papers relating to slavery and the British Empire. Virtually every college library is packed with volumes from the era of the slave trade, before the era of the slave trade, and since the era of the slave trade. Historic collections abound in virtually every single college library, scores of them. The Codrington Library in All Souls College was founded with a gift of books from a family of plantation owners in Barbados, and it's one of the richest in the whole of England. This is why Balliol is particularly fortunate under the leadership of Master Dame Helen Gosch, because in effect, in this instance, it may well be that Balliol's initiative in displaying its slave history archives will serve as an example to follow by other colleges and private collectors, collections in private hands, and of similar historical treasures in other institutions throughout Britain. If Balliol can digitize these materials, why can't others? Basically, across the globe, new initiatives in the humanities are emerging from within specialized library collections, like the one at Balliol. Through the digitization and electronic exchange of rare texts and images, these libraries are contributing to an important new dimension to the development of a global overview effect. Across the globe, new initiatives in the humanities are emerging from within these specialized collections at Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, and numerous other organizations. This is most evident in the formation of international groups of scholars and students like those in the Africa Map Circle, a group that was created just last year to start looking at these things electronically. You can find out more of it and get an introduction to their digital resources online on YouTube. Their work has been inspired by the example of a former Rhodes Scholar who returned to the United States and taught the first courses in African history at Yale University more than 50 years ago. His name was Prosser Gifford. Yale has maintained and in fact expanded greatly upon the African Studies scholarship of Prosser Gifford. Its graduates now direct many of the world's most distinguished international initiatives in world historical studies, including Professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr., who is now up at Harvard. Having graduated from Yale, he founded a new center at Harvard University for the study of African and African American history. In the digital age, Yale's rare book library, the Beinecke Library, has pioneered new techniques and new technologies to expand the study of the Atlantic slavery system and its aftermath. David Blight, an award-winning historian, has teamed up with Michael Morand, and there's a regular series at the Beinecke called Mondays at Beinecke. Just this last week, on the 13th of September, they held a session to look at the records of the first Black college proposed in 1831 in New Haven. It's important to realize that this was not convened by the history department or even the African American Studies program, but by the Beinecke Library. It's the librarians who have the technology and are taking the initiative at this point to bring these documents to the world. David Blight's other online events have included, just this week, a session in which he interviewed descendants of slaves in the New Haven area called Gleaming in the Shadow of Slavery. And others are intended in the coming weeks, including the forthcoming Yale and Slavery in Historical Perspective Conference, the 23rd annual conference to take place at the end of October, 28th through the 30th of October in Yale University, with the keynote address by David Blight and a welcoming to the sessions by Peter Solovey, the president of Yale. Other work has emerged from the Yale libraries, like Cheryl Finley's study of the iconography of the African slave ship. It grew out of her study for a PhD degree in the art history department at Yale. Similarly, at Harvard, Henry Louis Gates has fostered and integrated the study of art and history nationwide. within a newly created history design studio. They held an exhibit before COVID, and they have an online presence now during COVID. In short, it's through these kinds of online digital initiatives in the humanities that libraries all over the world have contributed important new dimensions to help us all envision the overview effect. The concept of the overview effect was initially described by Frank White in his effort to explain the common emotional and intellectual experience of the shared group of astronauts who expressed their emotions and insights upon returning to Earth. Frank was a Rhodes Scholar from Harvard to Oxford, and he spent his career expounding upon and, in fact, investigating the phenomena of the overview effect. In recent decades, it's come to be understood more expansively than just the experience of astronauts, but as the experience of those who are able to stand back from the constraints of their own cultures and begin to embrace their capacities as part of the common human race, alive on a finite planet. They've taken a deep breath, stood back, and viewed the Earth as if from the moon. It's that overview effect which enables them to embrace their humanity more thoroughly. The global humanities are really emergent at this point, in large part because of what has been done by the librarians. It's been the digital evolution of the libraries that has facilitated and assisted the creation of global humanities in all their disciplines and the expansion of the human experience of the overview effect across many universities and diverse traditions around the world. This is what is now being taken up in one university after another, rediscovering and now presenting the basic documents that illustrate the common history of humankind. Some dimensions of this process were anticipated long ago. Libraries were looked at as life systems for the information that was flowing through them. And early master's students in library science wrote about this 35 years ago, back in 1986. But they never anticipated and couldn't anticipate the important things that have come ever since. Nor is it possible to predict what will happen as the digital revolution continues to alter all habits and institutions of education. Is it perhaps too late to ban cell phones in classrooms? Well, perhaps. But what kind of environments can be created? Can the librarians help us create? To which all students of all ages will want to connect. Well, this will depend largely upon digitally informed librarians who can help us span the oceans and bridge different cultural traditions that, for the moment, keep us apart. The connection can be immediate with the technology of something like the QR code, which every teenager now knows how to decipher. With the age of their cell phones can put them instantly in touch with whatever is placed behind that QR code. Communications is not the problem. The content is. So we should start thinking about spanning oceans and bridging traditions. Libraries, the global humanities, and the overview effect in the digitized world, because that's the world in which we now live and will have to learn how to survive.